Welcome to the next episode of On the Couch with the Ethicalist. Today we have a wonderful guest, and it is, where do we start? You do so many different things. I'm not exactly sure what I should be calling you.
Fahim is fine.
Okay.
Though most people will start with Turtle Sheikh.
The Turtle Sheikh I absolutely love. We have written about you and your title of Turtle Sheikh on the Ethicalist. It's so lovely to have you here, Fahim.
Thanks so much for having me, and thanks so much for covering all the work that we do.
Oh, you're absolutely welcome. And I know you've just got off a flight, so we really are grateful that you've stumbled from the airport to here to be with our audience today. So let's talk about the fact that you are known as the Turtle Sheikh, very affectionately known as the Turtle Sheikh in the UAE. You have rescued lots of turtles. You've created 800 Turtle, which I know you will explain in a moment. Can you tell us what got you into marine conservation? What made you interested in turtles? Was there a particular event that triggered all of this?
I have to start with the fact that we live on the coast. And growing up here in the Emirates, and I grew up in Dubai, we spent every weekend on the beach. We were surfing, sailing, got into free diving, and turtles were, I always call them the best free divers, right? They hold their breath for hours, and when you see them swimming in the ocean, they are like us. You don't think that this reptile that breathes air should be thriving in this ocean environment. And a number of years ago, we were on a free diving trip off Seafood Souq, which is an environmental reserve, off the coast of Abu Dhabi, but it belongs to Sharjah. And I was swimming along, and there was this turtle that I saw, and it was sort of swimming funny. It's a video that I haven't really ever shown on social media. And I thought, this is kind of weird, but with the ocean environment, you're a guest there. You don't touch wildlife. You don't do anything. So I swam away, but I told myself that if I come back in an hour and that turtle is still in that spot, then something must be wrong. Because turtles are migratory species, they move around a lot. So I did. I came back and realized there was something I couldn't see. She was about 6-7 meters underwater, so held my breath and went down. And that's when I realized that she needed to be saved. So I grabbed hold of her and tried to swim to the surface. And you can't see fishing line underwater. And she was completely wrapped up in it, and her flipper was completely being ripped apart by it. So luckily we dived with knives. I pulled out my knife and I cut her free, and both of us came up for a much needed breath of air. And I think the hard part for me was this was the second turtle that my friends and I had saved in the space of 9 months. And the most shocking part was, if you look at where Seafood Souq is, it's in the middle of the Gulf-ish. It's just off the coast of the Emirates. Why I was there on that day in the 4 hours of life that turtle had left was very serendipitous, fate, call it what you want. And brought it back to the surface. The Environmental and Protected Areas Authority of Sharjah sent a boat the next day. We sort of had a night where we didn't get much sleep, looking after this turtle, making sure she was okay. It took a while for the boat to obviously arrive. Then they sent it to the Dubai Turtle Rehabilitation Project, where she was rehabilitated for a number of months before we released her again. And then in that time, obviously the story, young Emirati saves turtle became quite popular. And a journalist who's a friend said, I'm going to write the article in the paper. I'm going to call you the Turtle Sheikh, which I was a bit apprehensive about at the start, not one for titles. But I said, if it raises the awareness and brings a little bit of attention to something that means so much to me, then I'll accept.
And this is the foundation for the beginning of the Turtle Sheikh.
That's the story.
That's a wonderful story. Did you give her a name?
Promised my wife and I that if we had a daughter ever, we would call her Farah, which is the Arab word for joy. We were blessed with 2 sons, twin boys, so I named her Farah.
Am I right in believing that you put a satellite tracker on her?
We did. At the Dubai Turtle Rehabilitation Project, we track a lot of turtles, as many as we can, because it gives us so much data and insight into these migratory species. Eventually, they do fall off. The trackers run out of battery or they fall off. And she swam towards Abu Dhabi. There's a lot of marine protected areas there, even further south than the city of Abu Dhabi. And that's where she, I hope, is still thriving and enjoying her life. As an amputee turtle with only one flipper, it's even more interesting to see what happens when we re-release these rehabilitated turtles into the wild.
Yeah, well, I'm sure she's doing well with her 3 flippers left.
Correct. Her 2 hind flippers, yes, and then 1 in the front. Yeah.
Okay, one on the right. Okay, so talking about Dubai Turtle Rehabilitation Project, obviously situated down at Jumeirah Al Naseem. It's a fabulous place. It's open to the public. People can go down and see the turtles in the lagoons. Tell me about your involvement with them and you know what you do. Are you an ambassador for them?
I am. I was very, very privileged and honoured when Jumeirah as a group asked me to become the ambassador for the project. I didn't think that there was such a position open that I could have applied for. And once again, they said, that I was raising awareness for this cause, and would I be interested? As somebody that believes in impact, I said on one condition, that I could actually help make a change. So the project has, been around for a long time, since 2004. So we've celebrated about 20 years of the project. The pools that we have at Jumeirah Al Naseem are the best rehabilitation pools in the world. They draw in seawater. It's as close to a natural environment that we can have. I've seen turtle rehabilitation around the world. They're usually big blue tubs that we're trying to rehabilitate turtles in. So the investment that Dubai Holding and Jumeirah have made into this is nothing other than stellar. A lot of people don't know that the critical care facilities are actually inside Burj Al Arab. So those are 7-star for the turtles. And I think that, the work that they do was something that, as I say, just to be involved in it was just an absolute privilege. And they let me bring ideas to the table. Barbara, who is the director of the aquariums there and the project, does not hesitate to call me when we need a turtle being rescued, or we want to throw some new ideas on how to help protect this critically endangered species. And it's part of my life that I love the most.
I'm not surprised. It's such a rewarding project when you're involved in any kind of conservation, particularly when it comes to marine life. When you say we live right next to the coast. Barbara Langlenton is amazing. We've interviewed her numerous times for the Ethicalist as well. I love the work that she does with conservation with marine animals. So tell me, on a day-to-day basis, could you tell me what they do down at the rehabilitation project, like how they're helping turtles in the UAE?
There are a number of threats, unfortunately, to marine or sea turtles. And there are a number of species. The ones that you see in most pictures are green turtles. Green turtles are endangered, and they predominantly nest on the west coast. On the east coast of the UAE and Oman. So Ras Al Hid, for example, is a very, very famous, hatching area for green turtles. On the west coast, our side of the coast, we have the hawksbill turtles. And the hawksbill turtles are unfortunately critically endangered. And that's really what became, I think, created the inception of the Dubai Turtle Rehabilitation Project. Having said that, we have had olive ridley turtles, and we've had loggerheads as well. But the hawksbill turtles, we get a lot of the juveniles because they hatch on this side of the coast. And that's the first sort of threat that is a natural occurrence. As temperatures drop in the winter months, the turtles become a little bit lethargic because they are, cold-blooded species. We have such a rich biodiversity that the pace at which barnacles grow on these turtles is extremely rapid, and they get weighed down, and that's what ends up being washed up on the beach. A little turtle covered in barnacles, which I always say, please don't remove the barnacles. So many people think they're helping. They're actually, unfortunately, harming the turtle, and doesn't address the root cause of why the turtle is so lethargic, or cold stunned, as we call them, which is the colder temperatures. So when people then throw the turtle back in the water, it's very likely that they get washed up the day after. So we always try to make sure that people are aware that they shouldn't remove the barnacles. Unfortunately, there are some other threats, and all the other ones are caused by us as humans. We have probably one of the biggest root causes is plastic ingestion, which is devastating, and you only see after post-mortem when you see the plastic come out, which is horrific, but just part of why our work is so important. Incidents like boat strikes, which we have tried to encourage boaters in the UAE to slow down a bit and look out for turtles. But I will say that a turtle floating at the surface is probably because they're ill and probably because they've eaten quite a lot of plastic. So that tends to be linked. At least that's how I see it. And then the last one is entanglement, which is, the story of Farah and I, where turtles do get caught in discarded fishing nets and fishing lines. And that's something that I hope we can work with the fishing community to help reduce. There are far more less invasive forms of fishing, which globally is being adopted. And that helps bycatch, which unfortunately turtles become a big part of. That's the risks that we deal with. The team at the Dubai Turtle Rehabilitation Project work 24 hours a day. There's the guests there at Burj Al Arab are, when they're in critical care, requires people to be there often. So it's a job that, I take my hat off to Barbara and her team for doing. I get to do the fun part. I get to swim with them. I get to, tell the stories, which, I hope they see as important, and I know they appreciate it. But I can't say that my job is difficult when you compare it to the immense amount of work that her and her team sort of put in to protect these turtles.
Absolutely. And just one question, is light pollution an issue for them at all on the nesting beaches?
Yeah, so we've looked at, some of the areas where turtles hatch. Fortunately, the Emirate of Dubai has the Jebel Ali Sanctuary, where we do have, turtle nests, and their light pollution is not an issue because there is no construction around there. In Saadiyat Island, in Abu Dhabi, they do have, certain planning rules, so to speak, or rules for the area, for the hotels there, where there's a huge amount of setback from the beach, so that the turtles can continue to nest. And during nesting periods, yes, the lights are dimmed. For those watching or listening, turtles, when they hatch, are guided by the moon. And the light of the moon directs them, the reflection on the ocean tells them to go in that direction. If there is light, unfortunately, on the streets, we have seen on TV, and luckily not in the UAE, of turtles going in the wrong direction.
Bless them.
She'll be too humble to say it, but Barbara was a big part of that planning when she worked in Abu Dhabi as well. So she's had a significant and noticeable impact on turtle conservation in the whole of the UAE throughout her career, which I'm always very thankful for.
Yeah, I mean, that it's needed for somebody to highlight an issue like this, because so many times people don't know and it doesn't get taken into consideration. So that's fantastic that she's done that. Going back to when you mentioned turtles having barnacles and being cold stunned, you created the rescue helpline, 800 Turtle. Can you tell us a little bit about this and what people should do if they do find turtles that look like they're suffering or washed up on beaches or floating?
It happens in season, so when the temperatures do drop. And the joke I'll say, because we're friends, I'll tell the funnier side of the story was I got a little bit tired of people contacting me on Instagram.
Fair enough.
or contacting my wife saying, fine, we found a turtle, what do I do? Which, of course, I was thrilled that they were reaching out and asking questions.
Yeah.
I called up Barbara and I said, Barbara, people keep contacting me. Who do they call when they find a turtle? Now, I have a role in the government. And when I found Farah, I knew who to call because I work with them. But, for the average person, the average beachgoer in the UAE or boater in the UAE, who should they call? And they said, well, you called the telephone number. I said, well, what's the telephone number? 0432, whatever the number was. Yeah. I don't remember it. And I thought, there's got to be a better way to do this. Mm. And, Jumeirah is a large organization and I wanted to have my little bit of impact. So I walked into Etisalat the next day and I said, hi, I'd like a telephone number. And they said, what's that? I said, I'd like the number 800 Turtle. And it's saved, I think, don't hold me to this number, but I think it saved 160 turtles since we launched, which for very little money, I will say, humbly, it doesn't cost a lot for a toll-free number. Just highlights that sometimes we don't need more money thrown at the problem. We sometimes just need some fresh ideas.
Very simple solutions.
So if you call 800 Turtle, you'll be directed to the aquarium team, and they'll be there to answer questions, coordinate a rescue. And then, which I'm sometimes part of. If you find a turtle on a boat, you may find me, jumping off the pontoons or off the bridge in Dubai Harbour to try and save turtles. But it's such important work, right? And I do find that I'm very privileged and very lucky to have found something that means a lot to me, means a lot to my family, and hopefully makes a little bit of a positive change for the UAE.
Well, I know that marine conservation means a lot to you, which is, why you've set up Seafood Souq, which is another part of this interview that I'd like to move on to.
Sure.
You can explain Seafood Souq to our audience far better than I can. But just before we touch on that, I wanted to ask about ghost nets, because obviously you mentioned that Farah was tied in ghost nets when you found her, and I know that ghost nets are a big part of the problem with fishing, and a transition towards becoming more sustainable. How big is the issue of ghost nets in, perhaps not necessarily just in the UAE, but in this region?
It's a global issue. I think, just to be quite clear, if you think ghost nets are an issue, Farah was caught in one bit of fishing line. It was from a rod that was unfortunately cut at some point, and it made its way into this environmental zone, and her flipper got wrapped around it, and as she continued to fight it, it wrapped tighter and tighter and tighter. Ghost nets are, unfortunately, we are very, very innovative human beings, and we come up with ways to create materials that you can't see underwater and fish can't see, which allows fish to be caught in these big nets, so other marine life don't see them either. There is no incentive for fishers to bring those nets back. It's actually more cost effective just to, if a net gets caught, just to leave it out in the ocean. And it's an education thing. And it's not acute to our part of the world. It's a global issue. There have been some fantastic initiatives by companies like Econil that pay fishers to bring back their nets and turn them into board shorts, which I may own a few pairs of from
sure.
some of my favorite brands. I come from the business world, and I've always found that human beings operate on incentives. At the end of the day, there has to be a cost benefit to doing anything. And the way in which we structured certain parts of our economy in the past have not taken the environment maybe very seriously, or it hasn't been a consideration in the way in which we've built these incentives. Rather than funding CSR or taking capital and trying to sort of, from profitability, move it back in to try to fix some problems, I've always liked to look at the root issue or how the economics work and say, well, how do we create a system that actually considers the environment with those economic incentives, so the average person finds it more appropriate to do the right thing, rather than I'll do the wrong thing, but with the profitability, then try to right my wrongs for the environment. And that's just the way I think we need to continue working.
And I think this is, potentially what has motivated you to create Seafood Souq. Maybe you can explain what Seafood Souq is and when you launched it and what your motivations were for that.
I just came from Barcelona. We were at a digital leaders conference, small group of clients of a particular bank that were discussing leadership in technology and how we're trying to create value for the world. And I was very fortunate to be invited as somebody that's in the impact space. And I started the conference the same way I started most of my panels on stage. And we'd had this lovely lunch, and there was cod that was being served, which a lot of people had eaten. And I asked the audience, who here had the cod for lunch? And a number of them obviously raised their hands. And I said, who asked where their cod came from? At which point, nobody raised their hands. And I said, if we don't ask where our seafood comes from, then we are almost complicit in an industry that is rife with mislabeling, overfishing, exploitation. When we built Seafood Souq, we had this hypothesis that building traceability would put the power in the hands of businesses and consumers to make the right choice when we eat seafood. And there is a hierarchy, unfortunately, in proteins. If you think about when you walk into, if the audience is here in the UAE, you walk into your Spinneys, you walk into your Carrefours, there are flags next to, where our beef comes from. And everybody wants to know, the quality of that beef. We think less when it comes to chicken and even less when it comes to seafood, specifically if you're in a restaurant. So we built digital tools to help build traceability in the seafood industry. Seafood is such a unique food category. 50% of the seafood we eat is farmed today. So it's like the beef and the chicken that you're eating. These are fish farms that exist if you think about having your Norwegian or your Scottish salmon, your Greek or your Turkish sea bass. But the other 50% is more like mining. We're actually going out and fishing our oceans, hoping that next year we come back and we find some more. And unfortunately, by the time you eat that piece of seafood, it's so far removed from its source. It's gone from a fishing vessel to a fishery, to a processor, to a distributor, to another distributor that then gets sold to the hotel, and then that hotel is serving you a portion of fish. Can you really identify where it came from? We're on a mission to save our oceans from exploitation by giving digital tools to fisheries, to the supply chain, so distributors and so forth, and then to hotels and supermarkets to start making better decisions. And I'm happy to share some shocking statistics in the 5 years that we've been building this business.
Yes, please do. I was literally going to ask you about the biggest challenges that our oceans are facing at the moment and why there is such a need for this kind of technology.
The need for the technology, I'll use as an example with one of our partners in South Africa. So we began trading traceable seafood. That's where the business was born from. Let's be a responsible distributor that can share exactly where the source was, with data elements that are, guided by a framework called the Global Dialogue on Seafood Traceability. And we were trading line-caught tuna from South Africa. It was a fishery that covers about 65% of line-caught tuna in South Africa. And line-caught means that there are no nets. It's one-by-one fishing. It's less invasive. They treat the fish properly in the sense of how the fish is then slaughtered and then iced correctly and so forth. And Michelle, who runs the business, is a partner of ours in South Africa. And she spoke to Osama, our CTO, and said that we needed to maybe help them with a few of their other challenges. We said, what's the challenge? Well, fishers are still using paper and pen to record their fishing catch. It's regulated. Tuna is a regulated species in terms of fisheries. So my fantastic friend and talented individual, Osama, our CTO, built the first digital logbook for tuna fisheries in South Africa. We now have fully traceable back to the boat. We cover 65% of the South African pole and line tuna industry. And that is then shared throughout the supply chain to their buyers in Europe, where people can, we're making it more efficient, we're making it more transparent, and we're putting data in the hands of decision makers in the supply chain to make better decisions. So that was, an example of how our tools are used. I hope to do it here in the UAE. I hope to do it in other countries in the world, provide cost-effective tools to fishers to prove where their seafood is coming from. And the reason I highlight this case is something that may not be evident as I told the story. But what makes Michelle's tuna that's line caught valued higher in the supply chain when we don't have the data? A tuna caught with her pole and line method versus tuna caught in nets, the minute it enters the supply chain, is seen apple to apple. And the tools that we build allow environmentally conscious buyers to say, no, I trust the company's called ICV's fisheries in South Africa because we know their pole and line, because we know they're making the right choice, because SFS Trace, our technology, is the one that's providing that transparency.
And are you finding more of a demand for this? Are hotels or F&B wanting more conscious, sustainable food, be that fish, be that meat, be that locally sourced fruit and vegetables? Are you finding that there is the demand for that?
Leaders in the space, 100%. And I'll give an example where early on when we started the business, we were asked to supply traceable seafood to a lot of these hotels. They had actually asked us to be their supplier of choice, which we couldn't do. We were a technology company. We were sitting in our little office in Al Barsha behind computer screens. So again, very talented team members at Seafood Souq came up with an auditing platform and an impact dashboard to say we might not be able to supply you with all of this, but how do we provide you with tools to assess that transparency? And they're tools that we're so proud to have launched with Atlantis Hotels, now with Jumeirah as well, and we're in discussions with all leaders in that space that give them a dashboard to assess how traceable their seafood procurement is. We're testing with a number of large hotel groups around the UAE, so I won't specifically highlight, the individual cases. But we found with one test over 6 weeks that 50% of the products were mislabeled. as in from country of origin.
So can you explain to our audience what mislabeling means? I mean, I recently watched a documentary from a few years ago, Rotten, and there's one episode on mislabeling of fish produce, and I was so shocked by it, and it's not something that I'd ever considered before. But I think it would be better if you explained, what exactly mislabeling is, and put in some of those shocking statistics that you were mentioning earlier.
Mislabeling is something that is not the fault of the person procuring the seafood, and sometimes not even the fault of the distributor. When we catch fish or farm fish, there's a certain number of data elements that I'd highlighted in terms of what the global dialogue on seafood traceability requires. So you may want to know, if you were eating a piece of seafood, where did it come from? Is this Greek sea bass or Turkish sea bass? In the case of farming, not all farms are the same. Some farms have better quality feed, some are grown organically, some are not organic, and so forth. When they're wild caught, there is a country of origin where that fishing vessel caught the fish and landed the fish. Then there's the species itself. And if you think about, by the time we eat fish, it's usually just a fillet or a tiny piece of a much larger organism that we're eating. And therefore, how do you trace that piece to what fish it actually came from? My sort of fun fact is Chilean sea bass is actually not a sea bass. It's a very different type of fish. Please look up Chilean sea bass and you'll see what a Chilean sea bass actually looks like.
I have heard about this, that it's not.
It's a great fish, don't get me wrong, but if you saw the picture of it on a menu, you would be less likely to order it. We branded fish very well. And then the date at which it was harvested, how long it's been stored for. All of these data elements should be, in our opinion, as Seafood Souq, be provided along the supply chain, because this is food we're putting in our bodies. It's not just an environmental issue, it's a food safety issue. And unfortunately, with multiple actors along the supply chain, i.e. a fishery selling to a distributor, selling to another distributor, selling to another distributor before it finally makes it to the hotel or the supermarket, means that those data elements are not passed along. And that's why we have mislabeling. I'm not saying it's intentional, but what I'm saying is sometimes, you as a hotel want to be serving Greek sea bass, and it may be swapped in for Turkish sea bass because Turkish sea bass is, a little bit less expensive, for example. You want to serve the organic. How do you actually prove that this fish is organic? It's an extremely difficult thing to do. So the tools that we've built have helped, highlight, these unfortunately sometimes shocking statistics. We caught a case, once again, for confidentiality, we won't mention it, we caught a case where there was a venue in the Emirates serving an endangered species. And we highlighted it. It was on the red list of the IUCN. And we said, look, this is not your fault. You don't know this. We're providing you with the tools to make better decisions. And they have obviously taken it off since. And I defend the hotels and the supermarkets. They didn't have the tools to do this before. Thanks to technology, we can now provide those cost-effective tools for the industry to make better decisions.
Okay, so I mean, you've touched on the fact of mislabeling, but what about marine life in general? I mean, we are, as you've mentioned, we are overfishing to the point that fish are disappearing. Like was always an abundant source that people never believed would not replenish. So obviously, I think there's a need for the solutions that you're providing with Seafood Souq, for example, for those reasons as well. Can you tell us a little bit about the state of our oceans right now? Because from what I've read, it's quite frightening.
The Earth and our oceans specifically do have a chance to bounce back. I use the inspiration from people that have been in this space much longer than I have been. And they are far more intelligent and have far more reason for hope as they've seen it over, further year or more years than I have. The example we use is whales. When I was born, there were less whales in the ocean than we have today. And if you sit there and worry that there is no way of changing this, path to destroying our oceans or chopping down forests or, whatever your particular concern is, I think it's not productive. Mm-hmm. We have to remain positive. We have to think that we can get there. And there are a number of things you can do to help our Earth heal. One of them is making more conscious decisions of what we're eating. Not necessarily eating more of one thing or the other, but just better choices along the way. And that's the role that we play in Seafood Souq, is to give people those choices. We're thankful for platforms like this to let people know that this is a thing they should be thinking about, because we don't think about it. We weren't raised asking questions about where our fish comes from. That's why I remain optimistic. The ocean, the blue economy, is, if it was valued, I think they say it would be the 7th largest economy in the world. It covers 70% of our Earth. We know less about the oceans than probably we do about space at the moment. So I'm a big advocate for ocean research and making sure that we, really double click on this big blue part of our planet that we may not have all the information on.
And I also think 1 in 10 people in the world rely on the sea for their livelihood.
1 in 3 when it comes to
Wow.
seafood, either as a primary source of protein or income, which is big statistics that we use to highlight the need. What battles am I fighting? I'm fighting the obsession with carbon. The panel that I was on was called, the green economy. At which point, I didn't make them change it before the session, but on the stage I said, well, I work in the blue economy. Right? I think we have, I say this often, and I mean, don't disrespect anybody working in the field, but we aggregate to the abstract. Aggregating to the abstract means we are so obsessed with something called carbon because it can be counted on a balance sheet, or it can be put in an Excel sheet to work with. But if I was to ask you listening to this podcast, what does a kilo of carbon look like? I think it's very difficult to explain. And I'll leave you with this one thought. I was asked by a government of whether or not they could use our platform, Seafood Souq's SFS Trace procurement tools, to encourage local sourcing. And the reason is that flying in fish is got a huge carbon cost. And if we sourced our seafood locally, then we would be able to, reduce the carbon cost. But if we sourced all of our seafood locally in this market that didn't have traceability, we would then overfish that ocean. And the world that we work in is this world of trade-offs, where I said no to the project on principle, where I said, I don't believe in your carbon narrative being more important than marine biodiversity. Personally, that's Fahim's choice. But I think we need to broaden our understanding of what this planet needs, and we need to start changing, like I say, those economic incentives within businesses, within consumer choices, that we're working towards what I call sustainability, which is a world in which, economic resilience and environmental protection go hand in hand, not give up one for the sake of the other.
I would love to leave it on that, but you did say something that I would just like to answer one more question,
Sure.
which is just about consumer choices. So, our readers are consumers. What can they be doing to be making more conscious choices? Is seafood labelled at the moment? Is there a way of knowing? How do we make those choices?
Thank you for asking that question, because I think it helps raise the awareness of an issue that we're highlighting. The next time you're sitting at a restaurant in the UAE or abroad and you're going to order a piece of seafood, do ask where it comes from. Ask the waiter or waitress, ask the staff there, ask your supermarket, where does this come from? When was it caught? The tools are there to be able to do it. But if we don't ask the questions, then businesses don't have the incentive to change. That's the first step. And then the other one is to really work with your local fishmonger, if you do eat fish, on finding out which seafood is the freshest, which seafood is probably local. I do encourage people to buy local. We have a seafood economy in the UAE that's about $300 million. It's small because we're a large economy, but it's such an important sector for this country. So do choose local fish. I do encourage it. If we're going to be fishing our oceans, I'd rather see that being used than it being wasted. So choose local first. Look out for really great recipes. I'm happy to share some for some of the local fish that we have in the UAE. And the more questions we ask, then I think the more that businesses will find the need to have the transparency and traceability that we're encouraging.
And to put Seafood Souq markings on
SFS
fish.
trace, we can trace all of it. So hopefully there will be a world in which we can have that level of transparency and traceability, and we'll keep working very, very hard to do so.
I look forward to that day.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
It's been a privilege. Thank you.
And now you can go and rest after that flight. Take care and speak to you soon.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.